We live in a world obsessed with visible courage, the kind that makes headlines, wins awards, and inspires movies. But there's another kind of bravery that rarely gets acknowledged. The courage to face the fears we've spent years pretending don't exist. Every human being carries two types of fears. The first kind announces itself loudly. Spiders, heights, public speaking. These fears have names, faces, and clear boundaries. We can point to them, discuss them at dinner parties, and even laugh about them with friends. But the second type operates differently. These fears don't knock on your door or send advance warning. They slip into your life like smoke under a door frame, invisible yet pervasive, shaping your choices from the shadows. They're the fears you've buried so deeply that you've forgotten they were ever there, yet they continue to architect your entire existence. This is the phenomenon psychologists call repressed fear, and it may be the most powerful force you never think about. Have you ever wondered why you consistently avoid certain types of conversations, even when there's no logical reason? Or why you find yourself hesitating at the threshold of opportunities that could transform your life, despite having no visible obstacles in your path? Perhaps you've noticed how you always seem to sabotage relationships just when they're getting serious, or how you perpetually delay pursuing that dream you claim to want so desperately. You tell yourself it's about timing, or practicality, or simply not being ready yet. But what if the real reason runs much deeper? Repressed fear doesn't announce itself with panic attacks or obvious avoidance behaviors. Instead, it whispers, it operates through subtle redirections, gentle nudges away from certain paths, and an inexplicable sense that some doors are simply not for you. Over time, these small detours can completely alter the trajectory of your life, leading you down roads you never consciously chose to travel. The human mind possesses an extraordinary capacity for self-protection. When we encounter experiences that feel overwhelming, threatening, or unbearable, our psychological defense systems activate. Repression is one of the most sophisticated of these mechanisms, the mind's way of taking something too painful to process and storing it in the unconscious, where it can't hurt us in the immediate moment. On the surface, this appears to solve the problem. The fear seems to disappear, leaving us free to move forward. But beneath the surface, something entirely different is happening. Sigmund Freud famously compared the human psyche to an iceberg, with consciousness representing only the small portion visible above water. The vast majority of what shapes our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors remains hidden beneath the surface, in the realm of the unconscious. Repressed fears don't vanish when we push them down. They transform, they become the invisible architects of our daily choices, manifesting in ways we rarely recognize as fear at all. They show up as chronic procrastination, perfectionism that paralyzes rather than motivates, overthinking that keeps us stuck in analysis rather than action, and even physical symptoms like unexplained tension, headaches, or digestive issues. Consider the person who endlessly scrolls through social media late into the night, not because they find it particularly entertaining, but because something deep inside resists the silence that would come with putting the phone down. That silence feels dangerous, as if it might reveal something they're not ready to face. So they keep moving, keep distracting, keep running from a pursuer they can't even name. Or think about the individual who's talked about writing a novel for years but never begins. They have elaborate explanations, lack of time, uncertainty about the plot, waiting for the perfect moment. But underneath these rational-sounding excuses may lie a repressed fear of exposure, of being judged, of discovering they're not as talented as they've imagined themselves to be. From an evolutionary perspective, fear served a crucial survival function. It kept our ancestors alive by making them cautious around predators, alert to environmental dangers, and motivated to prepare for threats. Fear was, and still is, a sophisticated early warning system designed to protect us from harm. But evolution optimized us for survival, not for thriving in the complex emotional landscape of modern life. The same mechanisms that once protected us from saber-toothed tigers now activate in response to social rejection, professional failure, or emotional vulnerability. And when these fears become too intense or persistent, the mind employs the same strategy it always has: hide the threat until it passes. The problem is that in our contemporary world, many of the things we fear most, rejection, failure, loss of control, abandonment, don't simply pass, they're woven into the fabric of human experience. By repressing our fears around these inevitable aspects of life, we don't eliminate the threat. We just ensure that we'll navigate these experiences unconsciously, reactively, and often destructively. Repressed fears rarely remain completely hidden. They leave fingerprints throughout our lives in the form of consistent patterns and behaviors that seem to have no logical explanation. The person who grew up with unpredictable parents might develop a repressed fear of chaos or loss of control. As an adult, this fear might manifest as an obsessive need to plan every detail of their life, an inability to tolerate spontaneity, or a tendency to become anxious when others don't follow through on commitments. They don't think of themselves as afraid. They see themselves as organized, responsible, and reliable. But underneath, an old fear is still calling the shots. Similarly, someone who experienced early abandonment might repress the terror of being left alone. This fear could later emerge as a pattern of clinging too tightly to relationships, sabotaging connections before the other person has a chance to leave, or avoiding intimacy altogether. They might describe themselves as independent, selective, or simply unlucky in love, never recognizing that fear as the invisible force shaping their romantic life. Perhaps most tragically, repressed fear often disguises itself as its opposite. The person who secretly fears powerlessness might become controlling, dominating conversations and relationships in an unconscious attempt to prove they're in charge. The individual who represses their fear of inadequacy might become a workaholic, chasing achievement not for joy or fulfillment, but as armor against the possibility of being found lacking. Repressed fear doesn't only shape individuals, it shapes entire cultures and societies. Communities develop collective blind spots, taboos around certain subjects, and shared patterns of avoidance that can persist for generations. Consider how entire cultures might repress fears around mortality, leading to societies that are uncomfortable with aging, death, or even serious illness. Or how communities might collectively avoid discussions of historical trauma, passing down patterns of silence that affect generations who never directly experienced the original events. In this way, repressed fear becomes not just a personal phenomenon, but a social one, creating invisible boundaries around what can be discussed, acknowledged, or even imagined within a given community. Here lies one of the most profound paradoxes of human psychology. The more we avoid something, the more power it gains over us. Fear thrives in darkness, growing stronger in the absence of conscious attention, but the moment we begin to acknowledge its presence, even tentatively, even imperfectly, it begins to lose its grip. This creates a cruel irony. The very mechanism designed to protect us from overwhelming fear often ensures that the fear remains overwhelming. By keeping it hidden, we prevent ourselves from developing the tools, perspectives, and resilience that would actually allow us to handle it. Yet for most people, even the first step toward acknowledgement feels impossible. After all, who wants to admit that their carefully constructed life might be guided not by wisdom or strength, but by buried terror? The encouraging truth is that repressed fear, no matter how deeply buried, always leaves a trail. It cannot operate in your life without creating evidence of its presence. Learning to recognize this evidence is the first step toward reclaiming your freedom. Pay attention to your hesitations, those moments when you pause at the threshold of opportunity without clear reason. Notice your escapes, the ways you distract yourself when life becomes too quiet or still. Observe your patterns of avoidance, the conversations you steer away from, the places you don't go, the risks you don't take. Watch for the emotions that feel too big, too dangerous, or too overwhelming to fully experience. Notice the subjects that make you change the topic, the memories you skip over, the dreams you dismiss as unrealistic before giving them serious consideration. These aren't random quirks or personality traits. They're breadcrumbs leading back to the fears you've worked so hard to forget. Modern neuroscience has revealed that repressed fears don't just live in our minds, they're encoded in our bodies. The amygdala, our brain's alarm system, doesn't distinguish between current threats and old unresolved fears. It continues to sound warnings based on past experiences, even when those experiences have been consciously forgotten. This is why some people experience unexplained anxiety, chronic tension, or physical symptoms that don't seem connected to anything happening in their present life. The body remembers what the mind has tried to forget, holding on to the physiological imprints of old fears like a library of unread books. But this same neuroplasticity that allows fear to embed itself so deeply also provides the pathway for healing. The brain that learned to repress can also learn to integrate. The body that holds trauma can also release it. The nervous system that became hypervigilant can also learn to relax. Perhaps the most beautiful aspect of working with repressed fear is discovering that beneath every fear lies something precious we were trying to protect. Fear is never random. It always points toward what we value most deeply. If you fear rejection, it reveals how much you value love and connection. If you fear failure, it shows how much you value growth and achievement. If you fear loss, it demonstrates how much you value what you have. The intensity of the fear is often proportional to the importance of what it's guarding. This means that facing repressed fear isn't just about removing obstacles, it's about reclaiming the parts of yourself that got lost in the process of self-protection. When you turn toward a hidden fear with curiosity and compassion, you don't just release the fear, you rediscover the values, dreams, and capacities that the fear was trying to preserve. Uncovering repressed fear requires what we might call gentle archaeology, the careful, patient process of excavating buried aspects of your inner life without causing further damage. This begins with curiosity rather than judgment. When you notice yourself avoiding something or feeling inexplicably resistant, pause and ask, what might I be afraid of here? Not the surface level, socially acceptable answer, but the deeper, more vulnerable truth. The second element is patience. Repressed fears didn't develop overnight, and they won't resolve overnight. They've been your companions for years, maybe decades, serving as invisible guardians of your psychological safety. Expecting them to dissolve quickly is like asking a loyal guard dog to abandon its post without explanation. Instead, the process requires gradual awareness, small steps, and the willingness to return to the question again and again. Each time you catch yourself hesitating, escaping, or resisting, you have another opportunity to notice what might be underneath. The third crucial element is compassion. When repressed fears begin to surface, they often bring shame with them. You might think, why am I still afraid of this? Why can't I be stronger? But compassion changes the entire dynamic. It reminds you that repression was never weakness. It was intelligence. It was your psyche's way of keeping you functional when you didn't have the resources to process overwhelming experiences. As you develop a different relationship with repressed fear, something remarkable happens. The fear doesn't necessarily disappear, but it transforms from a prison guard into a teacher. Instead of unconsciously avoiding what scares you, you begin to approach it with curiosity. Instead of being controlled by hidden fears, you start to learn from them. This doesn't mean becoming reckless or ignoring legitimate dangers. It means developing the capacity to distinguish between old fears that no longer serve you and current intuition that deserves attention. It means learning to feel fear without being overwhelmed by it, to acknowledge its presence without letting it make all your decisions. The person who once avoided intimacy because of repressed abandonment fears might learn to recognize when that old fear is activated, feel it fully, and then choose connection anyway. The individual who procrastinated due to hidden perfectionism might notice the fear of imperfection arising and decide to act despite it. When you begin to face repressed fears, the effects ripple out far beyond your individual life. You become more authentic in your relationships because you're no longer performing from a place of hidden terror. You make decisions based on your actual values rather than unconscious avoidance patterns. You develop genuine confidence, not the brittle kind that depends on never being challenged, but the flexible kind that can bend without breaking. Perhaps most importantly, you develop compassion for others who are struggling with their own hidden fears. You begin to see that behind every difficult behavior, every puzzling choice, every seemingly irrational reaction, there might be a frightened part of someone trying to stay safe in the only way it knows how. Working with repressed fear isn't a problem to be solved once and forgotten. It's an ongoing relationship to be tended throughout your life. As you grow and change, new fears may emerge, or old ones may resurface in different forms. This isn't a sign of failure, it's a sign of being human. The goal isn't to become fearless, but to become fear-friendly, to develop the capacity to be with fear without being controlled by it, to see it as information rather than instruction, as a messenger rather than a master. As you reflect on your own relationship with repressed fear, remember this: everyone you know is carrying hidden fears. The colleague who seems supremely confident, the friend who appears to have it all together, the family member who never shows vulnerability. They all have shadows they're navigating, fears they're learning to face or still learning to hide. This recognition doesn't diminish anyone's strength. It reveals the universal nature of the human experience. We're all walking around with invisible wounds and hidden courages, doing our best to live meaningful lives while carrying the weight of our unprocessed experiences. Ultimately, the question isn't whether you have repressed fears. You do. The question is whether you're willing to develop a conscious relationship with them. Whether you're ready to stop being unconsciously guided by invisible forces and start making choices from a place of awareness. This choice, the choice to turn toward what you've been turning away from, might be the most important decision you ever make. Not because it will eliminate fear from your life, but because it will transform fear from your secret ruler into your conscious advisor. Tonight, when the world becomes quiet and the distractions fade away, you might ask yourself, what am I still afraid to face? Whatever answer arises, remember that it's not there to destroy you. It's there to guide you back to the parts of yourself that have been waiting in the shadows, ready to be reclaimed. The fears you've repressed aren't just barriers to overcome. They're invitations to become more whole, more free, and more authentically yourself than you ever imagined possible. And perhaps that's the greatest secret of all. The very things we're most afraid to face often hold the keys to the life we most want to live. In the end, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the willingness to let fear be present without letting it be in charge. And that willingness, practiced moment by moment, choice by choice, might just be the most radical act of self-love you can offer yourself and the world.